At the crossroads of great change, we are faced with a need for great resolve. To challenge the challenging, to build a resilient world for tomorrow. And while we remain rooted to the realities of our communities, today the systems we create, the conversations we hold, actively question these realities and make space for change. Because for 1 billion Indians to thrive, we must relook at our realities as fluid, our potential for change as flexible and interconnected. So this year, we are coming together to embrace that potential of transforming communities through a convergence of perspectives and continued action that rebuilds the future with resilience.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the 13th edition of the Dasra Philanthropy Week. While the last decade has given us great reason to celebrate our economic progress, the devastating pandemic has forced us to confront our current reality. There are two stark realities: becoming one of the world's fastest growing major economies called India, and the other one called Bharat, where 400 million realities have become the largest number of extreme poor globally. With this backdrop and the fresh wounds of the COVID war, this year's forum focuses on continuity, community, and convergence, sharing learnings for collaborative action for greater continuity, keeping communities at the center and forcing convergence towards inclusive, scalable solutions, accelerating Dasra's vision, a transformed India where 1 billion thrive with dignity and equity. With you today, Dasra celebrates its 22 years of pioneering an approach to shaping collaborative philanthropy, which has new players, tremendous innovation, and a changing landscape. Regardless, Dasra's work is guided by a strong belief in prioritizing the lives of vulnerable communities, trusting and respecting the wisdom of local homegrown nonprofits, and leveraging the power of trust-based networks to build social capital with a JEDI lens: gender, equity, diversity, and inclusion. Dasra now thrives on two core capabilities: leading collaborative platforms and catalyzing proximate philanthropy towards Dasra's mission, collaborative action to accelerate social change. Since 1999, Dasra has strengthened the social sector talent pipeline with over 350 Dasra alumni, fundraised more than $280 million, supported 1,000 plus diverse NGOs across the country, and affected the lives of over 90 million Indians. We need a philanthropic revolution and a bold ambition. By 2030, Dasra aims to raise $1 billion and affect over 500 million lives. Join us in this urgent call to action: 1 billion thriving. The nation needs you, Bharat needs you. Welcome to this session called Empowering Communities Through Data, Reimagining the Future of India. We're in partnership with Bloomberg and Societal Platform. Thank you.
Thanks, Divya. Before we begin, I'd like to run through some house rules for us to keep in mind. For an optimal viewing experience, please select speaker mode from the top right on your Zoom app. If you have any questions for the presenters, you can submit a question via the online chat feature, and they will be addressed at the end of the roundtable discussion. Please feel free to add your preferred pronouns to your Zoom name. We will have a roundtable conversation that will deep dive into how various stakeholders can come together to harness data for transformational impact and showcase powerful examples and best practices on how to access to the right data at the right time can empower communities to see, sense, and solve their problems. We have some very exciting and inspirational discussions that will be joining us for this session, And I'd like to invite our moderator, Akshay Soni, Senior Director at the Nudge Center for Social Innovation, to get us started and to introduce the other discussants. Welcome again, everyone, to this session brought to you by Dasra in partnership with Bloomberg and Societal Platform.
Thanks, Nirali. Welcome, everyone. Today, we've got a panel composed of practitioners in the nonprofit and social enterprise spaces, experts on and enablers of data empowerment, and investors in data, thus putting together a really diverse set of perspectives on an intensely complex issue. Given the panel we have today, if I get down to listing accomplishments or recognitions, I suspect I'll be speaking through the entire session. So I'm just going to breeze through a quick introduction. Starting off from the nonprofit side, we've got Akash Sethi, the founder of Quest Alliance. In a fast-changing world of disappearing jobs, Akash and his team at Quest are focused on empowering unemployable youth to navigate the future of work in India by mastering 21st century skills through self-learning. Also from the practitioner side, we have Ajaita Shah, the founder of Frontier Markets. Frontier Markets connects rural customers to high-impact products like solar lighting solutions, smokeless stoves, smartphones, and many more. They do it through investing in rural women entrepreneurs and technology to create a rural supply chain. On the expert side, we have Lindsay Gottschalk, the Director of Strategic Partnerships at Data.org. At Data.org, Lindsay works at the intersection of strategy and operations to strengthen collaboration among partners and scope and implement new initiatives. Also on the expert side, we have Sanjay Purohit, the Chief Curator at Societal Platforms. Sanjay is leading the evolution of societal platform thinking and innovative methods to resolve complex societal challenges with speed, at scale, sustainably. He also promotes systemic change thinking in a massive number of startups that he mentors in the impact space. And finally, bringing the funders' perspective to the roundtable today is Vandana Ramchandani, the Regional Head of Corporate Philanthropy and Employee Engagement, Asia Pacific for Bloomberg. As part of their advocacy for using data science and human capital to solve societal problems, last year Bloomberg had announced the Data for Good exchange in Asia with Dasra. So even more valuable than a funder's perspective, with Vandana, we actually have the perspective of an existing investor in data. My thanks again to the panelists for joining us today. Lindsay, I'm actually going to request you to kick us off today with your views on the data landscape. How can entrepreneurs come together and be empowered to create a data ecosystem that truly creates large-scale impact, which of course is what we need when we are a billion thriving? And could you talk about your experiences with data.org on that front?
Sure. Thank you so much for that introduction, and thank you to Dasra for hosting us today. For those of you who don't know that much about us, data.org is a platform for partnerships to build the field of data science for social impact. Divya, I really liked what you said when you led off about collaborative action, because I think that that's really what we need in this space. And that's a lot of what we try to embody in our work, to really bring together a bunch of different actors across different sectors to provide the tools and resources that can be used at the community level. We think about our work in three different ways: cases, capacity, and commons. And through each of those, we've sort of seen a different chunk of what we think of as the data ecosystem. So to start off in cases, we really think that, in order to really demystify data and data science, there's a need to tell great stories to really show how this work has been done before. I think, so last year, we ran a global challenge, the Inclusive Growth and Recovery Challenge, really to see what the landscape was for organizations globally applying data science to a social impact problem, specifically around inclusive growth and recovery during and post-COVID. And so in that way, we really saw the way that entrepreneurs, small social enterprises, multilaterals, small and large NGOs are thinking about using data and data science to solve problems in their communities. And we were overwhelmed at the response that we got. Over 1,200 applications globally, 68 of them came from India. And within that, you can really see that there is a thirst to apply data for social good problems. But we were also able to really look at a lot of gaps as well. I think something that we saw across many applications, and it was interesting to see across both, really, small NGOs as well as enormous multilaterals that we would all recognize, that partnerships are really key to this work. A lot of organizations can't do this alone, and where we saw a lot of strength was in different organizations coming together to form coalitions to bring their different strengths. You might have a really small community-based NGO working really closely with either an academic or a tech partner that brings that technical expertise, whereas they bring the real knowledge of their communities. And the applications that we saw that sort of combined that strength and partnership were really some of the strongest that we saw. So I mentioned we think about capacity a lot in our work, and we've been looking a lot at the global supply and demand. Supply, thinking about talent and talent pipelines, and that if we're going to be using data and technology, we need to expand access to the people who are actually going into these careers. And we also, we strongly believe that you cannot build good technology solutions without having more people at the table, which means, by gender, by caste, by socioeconomic background. And so we're right now in the process of a landscaping exercise that we'll be releasing probably towards the end of Q2 of this year, where we're really looking at what is the landscape for talent, and where are the opportunities to train more people, to expand access to data skills, and not just have it be something that is only attainable if you come from a certain background, if you have access to a specific university track, but really think about the interventions to equip new talent from a more diverse background, to think about opportunities to upskill existing talent who are working in local communities, as well as to train leaders, because a lot of this work, especially at smaller nonprofits who are making this transition in their data maturity, a lot of this work cannot be done without really strong leadership who understands that the organizational change needs. And speaking of that, we think a lot about organizations, and that's more the demand side. We recently released a data maturity assessment, which is we think of this as a tool to get a snapshot of where an organization is in time, and we think that can be a great tool for data empowerment, because it enables that first conversation about where you are as an organization on your data journey. And our vision is to really think about how we can create an ecosystem of tools and resources that can be accessible, driven by our community partners who are providing great resources, and really create sort of a platform for exchange of ideas, where no matter where you are on your data journey, where to go next to work on that next step. And finally, I'll wrap up by just saying that we believe very strongly in the power of a global commons, and thinking a lot about what we can do as a global community, looking at specific national communities, but thinking about how we can really harness the power of public goods that can be developed at scale, but then also thinking about how to go deeper and build the communities of practice around them. And so, as we're thinking about a lot of our work, I think we can't do this alone. There's a lot of power in partnerships, and we're so excited that that's how Dasra, that you're thinking about your work, and we're so excited just to see the groundswell of excitement for how we can better use data and make sure that decisions about how data is used are ultimately community driven. There's only so much that we can do sort of at this level, but I think that if we can be a catalyst to bring together partners to develop global goods, but ultimately to remember that everything that we do should be ultimately driven and owned by the communities we serve. That's really our goal. So thank you. I'll stop talking. But yeah, it's a pleasure to be here today.
Well, thanks so much for that, Lindsay. I, for one, will definitely be waiting for that talent report at the end of Q2. Akash, given some of the points that Lindsay made on nonprofits, I actually wanted to pull you into the conversation. We have an interesting duality in the nonprofit sector where the payer or the donor is not the receiver or the beneficiary of services. And hence the chances of mission drift, of course, go up exponentially. In this backdrop, how do nonprofits, through their existing solutions, place beneficiaries at the center of impact and, of course, of data empowerment?
Sure. Thanks, Akshay, for that question and the opportunity to share. I probably will go back maybe 10, 12 years just to share a couple of examples to sort of talk about this question. I think the first Quest works on empowering young learners with 21st century skills so that they can get ready for the job market and get access to jobs that are most aligned to their interests, skills, backgrounds. In this context, when we started in 2009 to really look at how do we use e-learning to get learners to learn at their own pace, at their own time, and we were looking at areas where there was no internet. These were community-based organizations who would mobilize young people who are out of school and train them for jobs to get into the labor market. And so at that time, Accenture and Quest were talking about building this digital platform and digital ecosystem. And one of the early realizations we had was that, while we want a lot of data as we roll out e-learning modules, the reality of our learners is that there is no internet. And if we have to really, have strong digital content, which is based on good pedagogical principles, we really need to, deploy this content offline and not necessarily chase the online model, because there are a lot of disadvantages of that. So we decided to deploy 150 different digital lessons all around job readiness and employment in an offline strategy, and that meant that the learners and the facilitators or the educators could get access to their performance data in terms of how many times is a learner looking at a lesson, the time on task. The facilitator would get access to the assessments that the learners were taking to be able to, do appropriate classroom interventions, given that a lot of digital content was being consumed in computer labs, which were offline or with very low bandwidth connectivity. And so the learners and facilitators were getting access to data, but when it came to actually reporting it to funders and to report it to the investors, we had to, there was a lot of heavy lifting we needed to do in order to extract we had installed, local servers in each of these centers. We had to extract that data onto a kind of common database. And that's where you start getting all the data that's siloed in all different, sitting in different places. And then you need to do a lot of, data backend engineering, etc. But the guiding principle there was that, learners get access to both the learning material and the feedback that they need to improve their learning journey. And we need to, engineer for the back end when it comes to funder reporting, which gives you more work, but at the end of the day, it makes the learner centricity the core thought process. Similarly, as we realized that we needed to do, say, jobs, local jobs, because a lot of our learners don't want to travel out to urban areas, you realize that the best data collectors are actually your learners, and you empower them to go out, do market surveys, market research in their local communities, to use simple tools like Excel or presentations to share the analysis, market analysis that they do with their parents, who start understanding the analysis that the learners are presenting to them, and start having conversations about the job market and about the local realities in small towns or in bigger towns as well. So learners again become creators of that local knowledge, while of course they use internet to look at local jobs, but the reality is that they need to make phone calls, they need to go talk to shops or local businesses and do this analysis and present it back to students, parents, to have the conversation about what's my future. So again, students and learners are really leading that conversation through doing analysis on their own. But again, I think the issue of, again, data sitting in silos remains, and therefore, can we have a more holistic view of what's the reality of the kind of jobs available, of the kind of learners who are getting placed, does not fit always into a coherent whole. And therefore, again, the back end engineering that's needed to make this all fit in a framework continues to be a challenge, although we have some advanced tools now that can, a data pipeline can get everything onto a centralized database, and you can use open source visualization tools like Superset that also allows analysis to happen by the learners or by us, where they can design their own dashboards eventually to do the analysis that they want. So that's where we want to get to, which is that all of this backend model works perfectly and the dashboards are ready for everyone. But it's been a journey. We're probably reaching there now, where these tools are now designed and ready to be used by all the different stakeholders to break the silos, basically. I think that's been sort of the journey in a quick few minutes. So yeah.
Thanks, Akash. That has been an interesting journey. It is at the center, still some way to go, but definitely sounds like it is centric from a learner perspective. On that note, I actually want to just ask you another question, because there was, you spoke about the work at the back end, the heavy lifting. Traditionally, one of the key reasons that nonprofit founders say they've struggled to invest in data is that funders don't fund it. So, of course, I'm talking about young nonprofits. Quest has covered a longer journey and is more mature. Can I tell them that it gets easier? How have you managed to do this? What do you think are the big impediments, apart, say, from funding, another big impediment to investment in data?
One is, I think, looking at data and tech as a core part of your operating model. If you are making it a core of your operating model, then the cost and the allocation of those costs need to be part of your project line items, just like anything else. You're not looking to make something separately, and this idea that one system, one platform will solve all your problems is, I don't think that's a fair expectation from one platform. So you can be using Google Sheets, you can be using Kobo, you can be using any existing digital learning management system. There will be silos, and you will need to invest in constantly bringing all of that data together. If you really want to be learner centered, then you got to invest in the engineering part, because the front end tools are simple tools which learners would use. So any one solution trying to solve your problem is a nightmare, based on our experience. And therefore I would say it's core operating model, make it part of your your project budgets, and of course you need an anchor funder from time to time to build in the strategy, the vision, to also build some tools that will help you realize that vision. You need people, all of that. But I think that's the core is really look at it in the operating model and not something separate.
Perfect. It's not an add-on, it's part of the core operating model. It doesn't get easier unless you make it easier. That's what I'm taking back. Thanks so much, Akash. And on that note, Vandana, I'd actually like to bring you in, also drawing from part of what Lindsay said. While Bloomberg's commitment to data is laudable, and I'd like you to talk a little bit about the role as an enabler that Bloomberg has been playing. Also, just wanted to understand, if there's a plan potentially at a later stage to bring other funders to the table. I know that funder collaboratives, unlike other collaboratives, history in India is a tad patchy, but even so, just wanted to understand, what are you seeing from your discussions with other funders around this topic?
Thank you, Akshay. Very honestly, it's interesting, but I was actually going to start by saying that, Divya talked about collaborative philanthropy, and there's no better platform than this one, right? So I actually laud India with the amount of collaboration and collaboratives that the country is actually being able to facilitate. But just coming back to Bloomberg and where we see it in the next couple of years, as well as, bringing in other funders. I mean, when I think about Bloomberg, I always think about a saying by Deming: "In God we trust, all others bring data." That is just the way we work, right? So we're very committed to that, whether it's in our business as a corporate or in our philanthropy work. And so we truly believe that data facilitates an unbiased, impartial understanding of unmet needs, create really targeted programs, and then measure impact. And, like Akash just said, for us, it's really, I was writing some of this, it's really the core, right? So we want it to be embedded in the operations of our partners. And as far as we're concerned, we took what we've learned as a business and we brought it into the world of philanthropy. So since 2014, we've been hosting the annual Data for Good Exchange conference in the US to share insights and progress on how to best apply modern machine learning and data science to solve problems in the public and nonprofit sectors, right? The world is evolving dramatically. Lindsay talked about the talent pipeline. I mean, that, it's exponential, and we need to have this sector, the public and nonprofit sector, keep up. But that onus is on us, right? So last year, very grateful, as I said, to the collaborative partnerships in India, and thanks to Dasra and societal platforms, we were able to bring Data for Good Exchange to India with the same focus. And we've been able to bring over 100 philanthropists, government officials, NGO partners, thought leaders to actually discuss how best to use data to serve the interest of India's most vulnerable. I know you talked at the beginning about the customer-centric or the beneficiary-focused approach, right? So I think that, to me, really stood out in the approach for Data for Good Exchange in India, the vulnerable at the center. I think, Dasra put together a landscape study, and then at DPW last year, we actually launched the Data for Good Exchange Empowerment Challenge to really recognize exceptional early stage innovations, social innovations, leveraging data to really scale and make greater impact. We, like Lindsay said, like they had a great number of folks apply. We also had over 130 applicants, which I think was phenomenal. So obviously there is a desire, but again, I think, great stories, as you said, Lindsay, demystify data. We need to create an ecosystem of resources. We need to create communities of practice. So I think what you asked me about bringing other funders, absolutely. We've never, Bloomberg Philanthropy's approach is very much driven by great partnerships. So we're very open to that. We are a part of a number of collaboratives around the world. We don't believe in reinventing the wheel and we truly believe in collaborating. I think that's going to be quite critical, honestly, in our journey in the next 1 to 2 to 3 years. Rome wasn't built in a day, but we need to keep on focusing on data to identify problems, target new solutions, measure progress. We can't let organizations like Quest, they haven't, but other organizations that are coming up give up, right? Because it takes a lot of resource and it takes a lot of effort. But while you said it doesn't become easier, and I think that's what Akash alluded to, I think the payoff is there. We just need to provide the support and resources to arrive at that payoff, right? So I think change takes time and it's not easy to embed. So we need to keep data center stage. We need to build tools and skills to be able to truly leverage data for good. And I think at Bloomberg, for example, with Dasra, we're now launching a mentoring program for the finalists of the Empowerment Challenge. So I think funders need to come with funds, but they also need to come with pro bono skills. They can come with mentoring. There's a lot more, right? The business has used data for so long. We have a lot of this, right? We have machine learning. We have AI. Why aren't we doing a proper transfer of skills to the area that perhaps needs it most for true economic growth and inclusion, right? I love Jedi for true Jedi.
Well, thanks so much for that. Bloomberg then is coming in more with a partnership approach to funding rather than just a pure funder approach also. Great to see that. It is something, capacitation is something that is desperately required in the impact sector. So very happy to see that also coming through. And on that note of the vulnerable communities, I'd actually like to pull Ajaita in to the conversation. Ajaita, as a social entrepreneur, you've led the creation of the Meri Saheli app, possibly the first app designed by and of course for rural women. There are a bunch out there for rural women, but designed by is a rarity. So based on your experience, what do you think are one or two of the key inputs needed to foster innovations in the data ecosystem in India? And of course, out of the Holy Trinity, Samaj, Bazaar, Sarkar, who do you think plays the most critical role? All of them are important, of course, but who do you think is the most critical?
No, thank you for that. And again, it's been great to listen to everyone speak, and I'm just so happy that this conversation is happening today, because clearly we are quite obsessed with technology and data. But I'll take a step back and maybe put this from my perspective of where I think the challenges lie, and therefore then where does the innovation need to be fostered, right? So I think we really need to innovate on how we collect data, aggregate, analyze, and for me, most importantly, use data. Today, tons of data is collected, right? But how that data is managed and organized and utilized, honestly, from our perspective, is really yet to be determined. Working on even also like who is the right person collecting that data. Ultimately, I think for me, the biggest challenge that I've always seen is that we tend to send third-party people to go collect data, doorstep of rural village households, not recognizing that on a fundamental level, that rural household is not necessarily giving accurate information because they don't know who the person is asking the questions, right? And so, when you start ending up collecting data that is frankly not contextually correct, because there is no connection between that rural household and the person that's actually asking the questions, you're fundamentally ruining your first step of the entire data ecosystem in the first place, right? And I think for us, that was a really big lesson. And then I would also say that, it's also about the usage and the goal of the data, right? So we've been working quite closely with Sarkar actually recently in the last 2 years, where, specifically in 2 states where there's about 10 million SAG women's worth of data technically available, technically on a digital platform, technically on a dashboard, right? Technically. But how that data was derived, how that data was designed, and how that data is actually utilized is yet to be determined, because frankly, the challenge is that if the goal is that we want to create enhanced income opportunities for women, but we're not actually even tracking what livelihood is offered to which women and what income is she actually earning and what is her challenge, then that data of those 10 million women that are in the SAGs is irrelevant, right? And I think that somewhere or the other, what are we capturing and how are we understanding it? And then how are we actually using it to make better decision-making solutions, I think is the other fundamental challenge that I see. And then I think ultimately, this to me is not a large challenge. I think it's a very solvable challenge, which is the digitization of data, right? I mean, we very traditionally, working in rural India for the last 20 years, see a lot of paperwork and ultimately believe that paperwork is frankly outdated. But if you start making an effort to digitize and ask the right questions, it can happen quite quickly to actually create a robust system. But if there aren't feedback loops and real-time assessments of where the data was created or collected, you're actually always going to have outdated data. And so therefore, are you truly being able to innovate and make good decisions on the interventions that you're trying to create, right? And I think, so for me, this has been kind of the rolling reality check that I've been trying to grapple with for the last 2 years. And I'm obviously, coming from our own experience, I mean, we did try to address these things, right? I mean, we built an entire ecosystem that was data-centric, right? We had a clear vision of wanting to collect data to drive insights to understand the deep challenges that rural households face on a daily life, on a daily basis, to curate solutions to address them. But then also track adoption, satisfaction of the intervention, which meant that you were intentionally building a system to collect intense amounts of data and insights on people, asking very personal questions, and ultimately constantly checking in with them again to see what is happening on the ground with real-time basis. The only way to do that is if you were able to actually pick the right person to collect that data. And ultimately, that was actually the reason why we had women entrepreneurs in the first place, right? Because when you have a rural woman who lives in that village, that she's known every single person for decades, she's fundamentally better trusted to be able to collect insightful information in such a way that is very profound, contextual, and accurate. But also if she's incentivized to do so, right? I think the challenge that I see in the ecosystem ultimately is we all pay for insights, we pay for big research reports, there's always all these big grant research things that happen, but the person that's most critical piece of that puzzle in the value chain, who is this woman, she never gets paid for the work that she does, right? And without her, the entire system fails, right? And so for me, the innovation is on incentivizing that value chain, i.e. her, giving her the right tools to be able to collect that data, which is obviously where the Meri Fehli app came from. Because women were very clear about how they wanted to use technology to create an income opportunity for themselves. And they're very clear about what's easy to use and what's easy to enable. So when you are coming in with an intentionality of why you want to collect the data, where you want to collect the data from, how are you going to utilize that data, and how is that going to be driving better decision-making outcomes, magic can happen, right, at scale, right? We have 12,500 women today that have helped 500,000 families adopt 10 million solutions, all derived through data and insights, right? So coming to the question of where the innovation lies, right? I think the tools exist. I think it's a matter of whether we're training the right people to adopt those tools and then be able to incentivize them in such a way to then become a critical part of that value chain. But then also, are the right eyes looking at the data that's being collected to make the right collective decision, right? So today, for example, if the challenge is that livelihoods are not creating enough income opportunities for rural women because market linkages are not there. Who's the right person to look at that data? Ultimately, it's a market player, right? It's not the government, it's not a nonprofit, because it's a different skill. So somewhere or the other, I think the ecosystem really needs to come together in a different way to start understanding how we better design the way that we're looking at our data strategy. With that said, I think, of course, bazaar, sarkar, or community, it's a very tough question, because I do think all three need to come together differently. But I think that my learning in the last 2 to 3 years of working with sarkar is the power is there, right? They have the infrastructure, they have the access, and they essentially do have the right people that can actually drive this. Ultimately, they have built incredible bases, but if they endorse this and they actually bring in the right players together, maybe we can actually then drive valuable change at scale faster.
Awesome. Thanks for that detailed explanation. So what I'm taking back is everything at the first mile, right? Incentives, right tools, right data collectors, and then finally getting the right eyes, potentially through collaboration, and ensuring everyone's taking a look at it, the right people are. Otherwise, again, we're back to those silos that Akash was talking about.
Right. Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Aryata. On that note, Sanjay, I'd also like to bring you in. But for a moment, I'd like you to take off your expert hat and put on the mentoring one. Given your interactions with startups across the impact space, across various ecosystem enablers, what do you think are the biggest 1 or 2 bottlenecks to data empowerment?
Thanks,
Data
Akshay.
empowerment, of course.
Thanks, Akshay. Fascinating discussion so far. So I really enjoyed a lot of learnings here. I think one important question is, what does it take to transition from a measurement and evaluation mindset to an empowerment and agency mindset? Because data has classically played the dominant role in M&E, but not necessarily in E&A. Go back in history, look at the history of thermometers, right? Thermometers took 30 years to shift from the hands of the doctors to the hands of everybody in the world. Today, anybody in the village can check the temperature of their child. But that transition took 30 years. And it took 30 years not because the thermometer was not available. It didn't take 30 years because it was not clinically proven to be right. But it took 30 years for the mindset to shift. So I think the biggest question that we have to ask ourselves as a whole community and everybody on this call and beyond is, what are the mindset shifts required? And it's not about the technology, the processes, the frameworks. It's about how we think. It's about our mind. To be specific, let me sort of illustrate 5 important mindsets. For example, when we look at data, we have the gravity to go towards how do I get data, which is an extraction mindset. Vis-a-vis the fact that the community and all the beneficiaries and the first mile, as I would like to refer to them, they are already emitting data all the time. And are we getting better at capturing what they are emitting without asking them to emit more or emit in a certain format or answer my survey? And because can we find a way to plug into what is already being emitted? I remember I was in a village in Bihar, sitting with a circle of women who were from a self-help group. And I asked them if they all had a device, and they said yes. And I said, what do you do with this? And they said, we watch movies. And I said, what else do you do with this? And they said, nothing else. And that's what got me wondering, saying nobody else thought that they could do other things with these devices and find a way to reach. Of course, on one end, we are saying, oh, people don't have access, but the people who have access are sitting and watching movies in a nice way. They are, of course, finding a break and getting some entertainment. It's a great thing. And there's an interesting story behind it as how does that happen without an internet access? is because a gentleman comes on a bicycle with a card around his neck. It's like a necklace of small cards. And he just loads the movie into the camera, into the phone, and they sit and watch the movie once they're done with the household chores. So the question is, somebody figured out a way to use. So I think this whole idea that we can extract data and then make it useful and then give it back to them so that they can be, I think itself is something that needs to be thought about. Are we processing it right vis-a-vis the fact that the people are always emitting data? All of us on this call, everybody is always emitting data. The question is, how do we capture it and make sense of it? Second is, once we have captured the data, we think about how to derive insights from it. Can we think about how to use it to trigger action? Because the fact is that, can the data help the beneficiary take some action before you get down to saying, oh my God, I have to now analyze this, synthesize this, run it through algorithms, figure out what it means. Is it possible to take small micro actions as the data is getting generated, rather than go through some mega processing before we can take some action? Because that is scalable. Mega analysis is doable, but not necessarily scalable, because it's very hard to do it in a highly deployed and distributed manner. It's possible to do it in a centralized manner. Third, of course, is that, classically we look at how do you curate trust? Do I trust this data? Vis-a-vis looking at saying, can data be built progressively? Trust be built progressively? Which is using data to build trust rather than using trust to build data. That's a mindset inversion, right? How do you continuously look at data to build the trust rather than putting all checks and balances and forms and formats and constructs and restraints to ensure that this data is trustworthy? Vis-a-vis saying, let me look at what's coming in. If I measure the temperature of the body 5 times, and if it is fluctuating all 5 times, the thermometer is wrong. The thermometer is bad, right? But if it's the same all time and it's high, then the patient is not well. But you do that through progressive measuring. And so how do we use that kind of a mindset? Lastly, of course, is we think about machine formatting the data, right? Using all sorts of reports and formats and rows and columns, and so that we can make sense of it. Especially coming to the Sarkar, Samaj and Bazaar question, all the actors try to get the data such that they can make sense of it. Vis-a-vis, how do we make data machine readable so that everybody can make sense of it, right? We don't even think about making the whole thing so simple that sense making itself is distributed. So I think there are lots of these fundamental mindset questions more than anything else, which may take many years, many experiments. And I'm hopeful that all the people on this call would run experiments. They would try and break some of these and many more questions. I just raised a few. I'm sure there are many more questions, and break those questions. For example, the question that Akash brought up of asynchronous, synchronous, online, offline, that gives you 4 data models by itself, right? Saying, how do I liberate the problem of data from the limitations of infrastructure, rather than saying, unless I have 1, 2, 3 and all the good stuff, and internet access and database, then I can't collect data. But I think that is a mindset we need to question, saying, is that really true? Or is that really limiting? And so I think it's a great moment for us to question some of the paradigms, to set new design questions and experiment. I don't think we have figured this out to be able to go and start thinking about deployment. I think we haven't even asked a complete set of questions. We have asked questions around data commons and how do we open up and creating repositories. And we have asked infrastructure and technology questions. We have not asked participant and community-based questions, saying, what does it take to reduce the time it takes to invent a thermometer and use a thermometer from 30 years to 1 year? What does it take in this day and age, with technology at our disposal, with such bright minds on this call at our disposal? How can we shorten that time? I would certainly urge and submit that we should take that up as a challenge.
Thanks, Sanjay. On that note of moving from a paternalistic to a learning mindset, I think we're out of time. So thanks so much again for everyone for joining this as well as for your insights. I'm sorry that we haven't had enough time to address the questions, but there are a bunch on there. So, if you guys could answer them over the next some time, that would be amazing. I'll just hand it back to the Dasra team.
Thank you so much to all the discussants for such an engaging conversation, truly. And thank you, Akshay, for highlighting some of the key learnings from this conversation. Before we get into the next segment of our session, I'd like to take this opportunity to share some context about the next set of speakers for our fireside chat. Today, this fireside chat will be held with a few of our Data for Good Challenge 2021 shortlisted cohort. As Vandana mentioned earlier, in the last year, Dasra, in partnership with Bloomberg, Societal Platform, and Stanford PACS, launched the Data for Good Exchange 2021 India, with the aim of enabling data agency for India's most vulnerable communities. As part of this larger initiative, we launched the Data for Good India 2021 Empowerment Challenge, through which we search for exceptional data-focused innovations that empower vulnerable communities, creating inclusive and resilient growth. It has been inspiring to see the work that is being done on the ground to truly empower end users with data. Today, we have representatives from the shortlisted organizations joining us in brief fireside chats to share with us more about the work they're doing on the ground and some best practices for us to consider as we co-create the larger ecosystem enabling data empowerment for the most vulnerable. I'd like to invite Divya to moderate this conversation for us. Over to you, Divya.
Thank you, Nirali. Very excited to learn more from our inspiring speakers that are doing some fantastic work on the ground. I'd like to start this conversation with inviting Akshay Saxena from Avanti Fellows. Hi, Akshay, how are you?
I'm good.
Thanks for joining us. Akshay, could you share and talk through a little bit about your data solution and also how you have designed it in a way that it actually gives empowerment and agency to the communities that it works with?
Yeah. So I think some of these themes were touched upon in the previous conversation as well, right? So I think for us, this whole journey with data, so maybe just a few lines of context, right? So we work with state government systems to help enable at-home learning programs, both for remediation and catch-up as well as for test prep. So now in that particular context, much of the data we end up collecting is learning level data, but I think more importantly, I think in the current context, usage data, right? Which is which child from which school is using what parts of our learning tools frequently, less frequently, how actively, how inactively. And there is a lot of interfacing with the child, both via phone, via the digital tools that we use, etc. So in thinking about design, I think the first real challenge, and Akash and a bunch of others talked about this, was how do you get the data in the first place? Because in these large scale implementations where you have tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of children attempting to use your platform, traditional methods don't work. Right? You can't really tell them, hey, go create a login, I'll send you an activation link, you click on something, yada, yada. And even if they did that, how do you then tag that child to an actual student? So figuring out a way to work with government data sets becomes really important, and finding a simple way to work with government data sets in a way that the government operators can actually give them to you is another challenge. And so for instance, in our case, after a lot of going back and forth, it ended up being they gave us a Google Sheet, or actually an Excel file that we turned into a Google Sheet that we used as our authentication database, right? When we built a simple layer to authenticate kids. But then that creates, I think, the other problem of maintaining security and privacy of data for the children, right? Because at the very onset, you have phone numbers and names of children who are, in their early teens, right? And girls who are in the early teens in the Indian context. So that's something we've had to be careful about. I wouldn't say we've found all the answers, but I think that's important. That's an important thing we've had to do. We spent a lot of time trying to figure out what's the simplest possible way to actually collect validated, legitimate data on children's learning. And the second part of the question is how do you empower kids with the same information? And again, I think in our specific context, this has been quite challenging, to be honest, which is what learning data is really useful to a child. Right? And which part of that data do you really want to expose to them? and in what form. So context is really important. So for instance, if you take a regular government school student and I gave them raw data on their learning, for 95% of them, that will basically indicate that they have no shot in, they have a very, very small probability of really getting to grade level, because most of them are 4, 5, 6 grades behind, right? So if I'm going to present data to them, it has to be presented contextually in a useful way. And often what that boils down to is focusing, as we are right now, primarily on completion and usage. So we give them information on whether they attended, didn't attend. Our leaderboards, our marking schemes are all focused on attendance and usage. And I think very soon we're starting to gather more meaningful learning data. And I think we have to be really thoughtful on how we give kids access to their learning data and what they interpret it to mean. Because in prior studies, when we did this in the non-online world, right, when we did this in schools, there seems to be pretty strong correlation between telling children that they're not at grade level and them losing motivation. It's not good for them to interpret data as saying I'm behind. So that's something we're very, very conscious of and going to be very careful about as we expose it to kids. One big challenge, I think, in all of this is, despite there having been several large-scale longitudinal studies with learning levels, it's really, really hard to even get hold of anonymized longitudinal data in learning, right? Starting with the fact that we don't have a national standards framework that everybody uses. And by everybody, I'm sure even the organizations in education on this call, none of us likely use the same standards. So there's a lot of work that needs to happen even for our data to be useful to other people in terms of standardization of at least the standards, which I think is going to be something we are trying to work towards, but is going to be, I really think we're before ground zero on some of this stuff. So hence forums like these. So it's good.
Thank you so much for sharing, Akshay. I think very interesting learnings and something that we can all also think about. And thank you so much for joining us as well today for this conversation. For the next chat, I'd like to just invite Amrita Kapoor from Swadhar FinAccess. Hi, Amrita.
Hi, Divya, and thank you to Dasra and everyone present, all the esteemed panelists and the audience. Great platform to learn and to share.
Thank you. Thank you. Amrita, we'd love to hear a little bit about your data solution and also how you see it scale in the next 1 or 2 years as well.
Divya, thank you. So Swadhar FinAccess has been working since the last 15 years to spread financial literacy and financial inclusion in vulnerable sections of society, low-income households, especially for women. And our work is part of the National Financial Inclusion Strategy of the Reserve Bank of India. We have 146 centers in 3 states with the Reserve Bank in partnership with them. And our digital applications, we have 2, Swadhar Dost application, which is a trainer's app, and Swadhar Sathi app, which is the client-facing app. It is also a financial education platform, along with our telecalling channel, is all integrated together to spread financial literacy to different parts of India. And talking about these apps, Swadhar Sathi app is an Android mobile application. It is a user-friendly application for learning financial literacy, self-paced learning, and also provides information on financial products and government schemes to vulnerable sections of society. It enables users, especially the women from low-income households, to track their income and expenses so that they can really track their unnecessary expenses, enhance their savings, understand banking accounts, saving accounts, get access to opening such accounts so that they can enter into the formal banking structure, and essentially get an introduction to different types of schemes that the government introduces, such as the Pradhan Mantri Jeevan Jyoti Yojana, the Sukanya Samriddhi Yojana, and various such other products as well. So this app provides access to low-income households and families so that they could get benefits out of these. Our trainers also help the users of this app to obtain these through either the post office or the banks that we have a partnership with. This app is essentially available on the Google Play Store and is being distributed currently across India through our trainers and our telecalling cell. Our second app, which is the Swadhar Dost app, is actually a trainer's app and helps them manage their trainings on a daily basis and helps them to keep connected to the beneficiaries and their customers, also guide them on whatever needs they have, because the trainers do a needs assessment and then recommend financial products from them that are absolutely customized to their family type and their income levels as well. Data is entered in our Swadhar Dost app on a daily basis by each trainer. Data privacy is maintained because there is information that our trainers have access to, such as clients' income levels, the family income levels, their education, how do they have little girls below 10 years of age, what are the exact financial products that the government has introduced for low income sections that would be applicable to each particular client. The Swadhar Dost also is a training app so that our trainers can, indulge in capacity building. We do training of the trainers as well through these apps. Currently, we have also started a B2B channel whereby we are training trainers of other NGOs all over India and helping them download the Swadhar Dost app as well, so that they may embed financial literacy as part of their core purpose and spread financial literacy and inclusion in their communities as well. Follow-up and feedback is another very important principle that we follow at Swadhar and use that to continuously update as well as improve our content and training. So the telecalling cell is an online dialer system whereby participants are helped with the training. If there's been any gaps in that, they are helped with further explanations of products, and assistance is provided by our telecallers by reconnecting them to our trainer in case of any need. So via the Swadhar Sathi app and our Swadhar Dost app and this telecalling online dialer system that we have, we are trying to spread financial literacy as well as inclusion at a fast rate in India, so as to empower and enable users to really track income expense and become financially enabled. Divya, our idea to scale, to answer that question, is by leveraging our 146 centers that we have all over India. We will be spreading financial literacy via our Swadhar Sathi app, and trainers will be training face-to-face when this pandemic permits. For example, right now they are on the field, they're training communities face-to-face, and also via digital platforms, because via digitization, the spread will be just 10x, if not more. So scalability will happen, through our leveraging our physical centers. And second, we have a Swadhar eFin class model, which we just started during COVID times, because we realized that digitization is the way forward. And since we were already 100% digitized, we could leverage that. And we are training trainers of other NGOs in various states of India on financial literacy, so that they may use all our apps to further embed financial literacy in their organization, as well as spread it in their own communities. And we assist them as well. There are refresher trainings we provide to them as well. So that is our scalability plan as well.
Thank you so much, Amrita. I think it's really inspiring to see the work being done by Swadhar in the financial inclusion space. So thank you for sharing.
Thank you.
I'd now like to invite another winner from the D4GX cohort, Sonam Shah from Umeed Foundation.
Hi, Divya. Thank you for inviting us. So just to give a context, Umeed Child Development Center, we work with children and youth experiencing developmental disabilities and their caregivers. And we hope that, we can support them in reaching their maximum potential. So, and what we really hope that, a way to achieve this would be moving away from the conventional approaches of, fixing them or getting them sort of just, fixing some of the deficits that they have, but more so what we're proposing is something that, we look at their skills and abilities as differences. We give them an agency to identify what they want to work on, how they want to participate, in what kind of life situations and contexts they would like to participate in. And, also leveraging the environment, because environment plays like a big role in supporting them in achieving their maximum potential. And by environment here, we mean not only just the physical environment, but also the social, attitudinal, institutional environment, because all of that can either cause a barrier or can be supportive for them to be able to do this. And to think of a way in which they themselves are, looking at the end line and baseline and measuring their own outcomes in the way that they would want to prefer, like, how they would want to rate their experiences of participating in some of these in their preferred activities. So just to sort of share an example, because this is a little, it's a different context. So just to share an example, if thinking of a child who is experiencing cerebral palsy, a conventional goal would be to increase the range of motion or to decrease the tone in a particular joint, but with an approach that focuses more on enabling participation, the goal would be something that the child wants to do, and the child may choose something as simple as being able to play in the playground with peers, and that would be the goal. And then the plan would revolve around leveraging the environment, identifying supports and barriers within the physical environment, like the accessibility, the social environment, like the people around or the peers that would be in the playground, or the attitudinal environment that could either support or create a barrier in terms of perception of disability, or institutional environment with the policies or government policies that would support or create a barrier. And one of the ways that we can achieve this is by actually training the professionals or the community workers who are going to be around the children and youth, because they would actually make this possible for them. So that is what we've been doing over the last year. We've trained more than 100 participants from 25 different organizations last year to, guiding them with like a stepwise approach to how they can use this within their clinical practices. And we've also sort of handheld a smaller cohort of about 30 participants from 7 different organizations across India to actually implement this and make this a part of their organizational plans. And we hope that, by doing all of this, there will be a lot of data. I think we are not at that stage where we have all of that data, but the hope is that this data will enable us not only of, working at the ground level, but will then help us inform in making policies and be used in that from the top-down approach as well.
Thank you so much for sharing, Sonam. It's really great to see, and we've been following the work being done by Amit as well. So thank you for sharing more context on that as well. For our next speaker, I'd like to invite Elsa De Silva from Red Dot Foundation.
Hi, Divya. Good evening, everyone. So our organization works on behalf have a crowd map called Safe City, which is in web form as well as on Android and iOS mobile app. And the idea is to encourage anonymous documentation of personal experiences, because in most cases, women and girls don't really go to the police, and there exists a data gap that does not identify or reflect the true nature and scope of the problem. So we've been mapping since December 2012. We were set up as an immediate response to the gang rape of Jyoti Singh on a bus in Delhi. And since then, we've been crowd mapping, not only in India, but also in several other countries around the world. In India, we have a data set that is the largest. And we have significant amount of reports from over 100 cities. We've been working very closely with community-based organizations and young people on college campuses to use the data to educate their peers and to demand for better accountability from service providers, but also think of solutions as part of a community. And that to me has been the magical element in our work, because how people respond to this data is quite unique in every context. And that's really what it is, right? The silence around this issue of violence needs to be broken. And when you start talking from the point of data, you can start to create a space for dialogue, build trust, and work with unusual stakeholders, whether they be religious leaders or parents. It could be even the police, where you're meeting them halfway to say, okay, there is a problem. You don't have this data set, but we do. And can we work on this pattern and trend to change it? Identify the contributing factors that ought to happen and create more awareness to challenge those factors that, contribute to this rape culture. So right now I'm on the road in Telangana, for example, talking to young girls about their digital rights. But digital rights and physical rights are pretty much one and the same. We are traversing between these different worlds of us, and we are impacted by socio-cultural norms. It's very hard to challenge it if you don't talk about it and if you don't have data about it. So what do we want to do in the next 2 to 3 years? Want to institutionalize our work with different kinds of institutions. So first of all, partner with NGOs all over the country. We've been focusing thus far in Delhi, Maharashtra and Goa, but we want to expand to 5 more states where NGOs in those states use our app data and use it on their communities. We want to partner with police forces. We currently work with 5 police forces, but we want to expand that to 10 more where they use our data dashboards as a decision-making tool in their own work for resource deployment and effective interventions on the ground. We also want to work with civic authorities and urban planners so they can look at city planning from a gender perspective. And of course, schools and colleges in states that we would work in. So if you believe that everybody needs a safe and inclusive environment to work, live, and thrive in, then do get in touch with us. Thank you very much, Divya.
Thank you so much, Elsa. Thank you to all the speakers for such insightful learnings and for sharing more about the work that you're doing. We'd now like to move to the last section of today's session. One of the key focus areas of our discussion today and the D4GX initiative has been around empowering end users or the beneficiaries through data. Today, we're very grateful to have a few beneficiaries sharing their stories directly with us. We hope to be able to listen, learn, and innovate through their stories from the ground. These beneficiaries represent the communities that some of the Data for Good Exchange 2021 nonprofits work with. My colleague Nirali will take us through this conversation.
Thank you so much, Divya. Thank you for that. I'd like to invite Arman, Anita ji, and Aarti Didi, beneficiaries of the data solutions developed by Avanti Fellows, Swadhar and Uninhibited, respectively. Hello, Arman. Hi, Arman. आपको सुनाई दे रहा है?
Good evening, ma'am.
Hello, कैसे हो?
Yes, ma'am.
आप ठीक हो?
अच्छे मैम, आप कैसी हैं मैम?
मैं भी ठीक हूँ। तो आप मुझे हम सबको आपके बारे में कुछ बता सकते हैं? आप क्या करते हो? आप कौन से क्लास में हो? आप कहाँ रहते हो? और उसके बाद अवंती फेलोज द्वारा बनाए गए जो डेटा सॉल्यूशंस है, जैसे PLIO, लाइव क्लासेस, जो सब सॉल्यूशंस है, वो आपकी मदद कैसे कर रहे हैं? आप बता सकते हो?
यस मैम। गुड इवनिंग ऑल ऑफ यू। मेरा नाम अरमान खान है। मैं गांव बालसमंद से राजकीय माध्यमिक विद्यालय में कक्षा 10वीं का छात्र हूँ। मैं आज आपको प्लायो के बारे में कुछ बताना चाहता हूँ। जैसे प्लायो से हमें क्या कुछ सीखने को मिला, प्लायो को यूज करना कितना आसान है और प्लायो तक हम कैसे जुड़े। जैसे कोविड-19 के कारण हमारा जो पढ़ाई से बिल्कुल नाता टूट गया था, फिर हमारे पास एक माध्यम हमें मिला, व्हाट्सएप का माध्यम। उससे हम पढ़ाई से जुड़े और उसी माध्यम से हम प्लायो से भी जुड़े। प्लायो से हमने जाना कि हम कैसे वीडियो देखते हैं, और प्लायो में जैसे लिंक पर क्लिक करते हैं हमारे पास 2 ऑप्शन भी आते हैं कि आप कौन से भाषा का चयन करना चाहते हैं। तो हमारे पास 2 भाषाएं आती है, इंग्लिश और हिंदी। और बाद में जब वीडियो देखते हैं तो पहले तो क्वेश्चंस के बारे में समझाया जाता है। वीडियो के अंतर्गत बहुत से क्वेश्चंस भी पूछे जाते हैं। प्रत्येक चैप्टर के लगभग दो चरण होते हैं, और उन 2 चरण में लगभग हमारा बहुत सा जो चैप्टर का भाग है वो कंप्लीट हो जाता है। उसमें हम प्लायो की जब भी मैम वीडियो सेंड करती तो हम देखते हैं, और जो प्लायो की सबसे अच्छी बात तो यह है कि जब हम आंसर उसके अंदर क्लिक करते हैं हमें तुरंत ही पता चल जाता है कि हमारा आंसर सही है या गलत है। और बाद में हमारे व्हाट्सएप पर कुछ चेंजेस हुए, तो मैंने देखा कि ये व्हाट्सएप पर क्या चेंज हुए हैं। तो एक वेब लिंक का मुझे लिंक का ऐप मिला, उस पर मैंने साइन अप किया और मैंने देखा कि उस पर मैथ्स और साइंस विषय के सभी अध्याय दिए हुए हैं, और जिस पर मेरी रुचि थी या जिसमें मैं कमजोर था मैंने उसको ओपन किया और मैंने देखा कि उसके अंदर भी जैसे पहले हमें वेट करना पड़ता था कि कब लाइक वीडियो आए और कब हम उसको देखें, लेकिन अब ऐसा नहीं है। अब हम जब चाहें वेब ऐप की सहायता से किसी भी अध्याय की तैयारी कर सकते हैं। और लाइव की सबसे अच्छी बात एक और है कि हम देखते हैं कि हमारा स्कूल टाइमिंग निश्चित है। हम उस टाइमिंग के अंतर्गत हम देखते हैं कि हमारा कितना कवर हुआ है, लेकिन हम जब चाहें प्लायो की वीडियो को ओपन कर सकते हैं। उसका कोई नियमित टाइम नहीं है, जब भी हमारे पास टाइम हो हम प्लायो वीडियो देख सकते हैं। हम यह भी देखते हैं कि आजकल के जो बच्चे हैं, खासकर जो यंग जनरेशन है, वह फोन के माध्यम से पढ़ना ज्यादा अच्छा चाहती है। तो वो एक प्रकार से फोन के माध्यम से पढ़ना ज्यादा अच्छे से समझती है, और एक प्रकार से प्लायो से हमें एनिमेटेड वीडियो मिलती है एक प्रकार से। तो हम उसके अंदर बहुत से सवालों का आंसर देते हैं, और मैम हमें जब भी बताती हैं कि हम कल को यह चैप्टर स्टार्ट करेंगे, तो हम पहले से बहुत से बच्चे उस वीडियो को पहले से देख के आते हैं, और जब कक्षा में उसी अध्याय को फिर से सजाया जाता है तो हम देखते हैं कि हमारा जो चैप्टर कक्षा में कंप्लीट हो गया है और हम आगे की भी तैयारी कर सकते हैं।
थैंक यू अरमान, आपकी बातें सुन के बहुत अच्छा लगा। अब हम अनीता जी को बुलाना चाहेंगे प्लीज स्वाधार से। हेलो अनीता जी।
मैडम
कैसे हैं आप? सुनाई दे रहा है आपको? क्लियर है?
हाँ जी मैडम।
ओके, अभी आप भी आपके बारे में हमें कुछ बता सकते हैं, और स्वाधार द्वारा जो बनाए गए जो सॉल्यूशंस है, जो समाधान है, उन्होंने आपको कैसे मदद की है उसके बारे में भी कुछ हमें बता सकते हैं प्लीज?
जी मैडम।
थैंक यू।
जी, मेरा नाम अनीता तांडुरकर है, और 2 साल के पहले हम लोग को स्वाधार से हम लोग को मतलब सिखाया जाता है। स्वाधार मेरे मोबाइल में स्वाधार स्वाति ऐप डाउनलोड किया हुआ है। उसमें क्या बेनिफिट है हम लोग को ये सिखाया गया, बचत कैसा करना है, और जो रोज का आमदनी कितना आता है उसमें, और उससे कैसा बचत करना है वो सब सिखाया जाता है। उसमें हम लोग को रोज का खर्चा क्या है, कितना होता है, उससे मतलब कल के दिन फिर से कितना खर्चा करना चाहिए, वो सब सिखाया है उसमें स्वाधार स्वाति में। और हमारा बच्चे का उससे वो पैसा जो बचत हो जाता है, उसमें हमारा बच्चे का पोस्ट ऑफिस में हम लोग आरडी खोला हुआ है 5 साल का। और हम लोग का, मेरा पति का रोज का मतलब टैक्सी चलाता है, रोज का कितना आदाय आता है वो हमको पता चल जाता है। तो लेकिन कितना खर्चा होता है उसमें पता नहीं चलता है, इसलिए वो रोज उसमें चार्ट आता है, कितना खर्चा, क्या खर्चा किया, कितना खर्चा किया, उसमें चार्ट हम लोग रोज का रोज लिस्ट बना के उसमें हम लोग कर देते हैं। हम लोग को उसमें मतलब पता चलता है कितना किया, कितना नहीं करना चाहिए, कौन सा करना है, क्या करना है, उसमें पैसा कैसा बचत करना है। हम लोग को वो समझ गया, और हम लोग को उसमें सब नया नया वीडियो अपलोड करता है। उसमें कोरोना के बारे में हम लोग को वीडियो अपलोड किया हुआ है, SBI कार्ड ATM कार्ड कैसा यूज करने का वो हम लोग को अपलोड किया हुआ है। वो वीडियो देख के हम लोग को अपलोड का मतलब ATM यूज कैसा करना है वो हम लोग सीख लिए। घर पे बैठे बैठे सब हम लोग है ना ऑनलाइन से अभी अमाउंट ट्रांजेक्शन करना है, कैसा स्कूल में बच्चे लोग को स्कूल पे फीस कैसा भरना है, तो सब हम लोग से ATM से अभी बैंक नहीं जा सकते। हम लोग लॉकडाउन में कैसा नहीं जा पाया, तो स्वाधार साथी में हम लोग सब वो सब सीखा हुआ है। तो स्वाधार में वो सब हम लोग को सिखाया गया है, ट्रेनिंग हो गया अच्छे से। अभी पहला हम लोग का मतलब कैसे चलते थे, हम लोग घर पे बैठे हम लोग को पूरा कुछ मालूम ही नहीं रहता, बाहर का क्या है कैसा चल रहा है हम लोग को पता नहीं चलता था। अभी स्वाधार साथी में ऐप डाउनलोड करने के बाद हम लोग को सब मोबाइल से ही सब कुछ करने में हम लोग को मदद हो गए।
जी
हाँ वो है बस। और मेरा पति का और सिग्ना पॉलिसी भी, जो टैक्सी चलाता है मेरा पति, सिग्ना पॉलिसी भी हम लोग उसमें ही स्वाधार साथी में ही हम लोग ऐप में से ही हम लोग कर दिए।
ओके नो थैंक यू। आपने जो भी शेयर किया वो सबके लिए आवश्यक है, हम सबके लिए जरूरी है। एंड थैंक यू कि आपने आपका जो एक्सपीरियंस है हमारे साथ शेयर किया। थैंक यू वेरी मच। थैंक यू। अब अंत में आई वुड लाइक टू कॉल, मैं आरती दीदी को रिक्वेस्ट करूंगी कि वो भी आए। आरती दीदी आ गए हैं? Okay. अच्छा ग्रेट। हेलो, आई थिंक वीडियो नहीं चल रहा है अभी।
हेलो, मेरा नाम और मैं छोटे बच्चों को ट्यूशन। आप मुझे सुन पा रहे हैं?
हम सब सुन पा रहे हैं, पर आई थिंक प्रोबेबली आप शायद वीडियो ऑफ करके बात करें तो बेटर होगा। ट्राई कर सकते हैं।
मुझे आपकी आवाज नहीं आ रही है।
अभी आवाज आ रही है? हेलो,
क्या आप मुझे सुन पा रहे हैं?
जी हम सुन पा रहे हैं। ओके
आवाज नहीं आ रही है।
आपकी आवाज आ रही है थोड़ी सी, तो आपको सुनाई दे रहा है?
आप वीडियो ऑफ कर, स्टॉप वीडियो।
हेलो,
मेरा नाम आरती है और मुझे कुछ प्रॉब्लम हुई थी। मतलब ये जो अपने जो लैट्रिन में जाते उस समय
ओके। आरती दीदी आपकी आवाज सुनाई नहीं दे रही।
कांटेक्ट करवाया उन्होंने, डॉक्टर से कंसल्ट करवाया। क्या आप लोग मुझे सुन पा रहे हैं?
आवाज बराबर नहीं आ रही है। आई थिंक थोड़ा इंटरनेट कनेक्शन का इशू लग रहा है। एंड to everyone, we apologize. I think due to some technical issues, we won't be able to continue this conversation with Aarti Didi, but we will share her story via video format on our social media channels. So please keep a lookout for the same. And